sitting here with my brother John, and I'm asking him to give some advice to my friend Anthony about how he might find himself someday doing the kind of things that you do.
Hi, Anthony. Where do I begin? I did not study computer science when I was in college. I studied international relations and music, and I actually didn't know what I wanted to do with my life when I moved out to San Francisco in 1989. I was 20, 21, 22 years old. But I did have a strong interest in desktop computing, and that was at the era of the Macintosh and all this amazing software that would allow you to be competitive with other larger organizations, because you could do music production or video production or accounting or any of these different things. This sucks. This started again.
Okay. All right.
Hi, Anthony. I'm happy to give advice. I've actually gotten a lot of help, so it's always good for me to kind of pass forward what the advice I've been given. There are lots of things I can tell you. One is that I didn't study computer science in college. I actually studied international relations and music. And I came to software development much later in life. I was actually 30 when I first started to code, and that was with a company that I co-founded that built a digital asset management software. And I guess I took advantage of the fact that the available frameworks and the tools and techniques of software engineering really have gotten a lot more accessible to a lot more people. So it's in a way that, when I was 20 and 22, kind of software engineering seems to be this practice of wizards, and you could never understand it, and it was a dark art, and if you ever even wanted to have some chance of doing it, you would have to have started when you were 9 and be a nerd your entire life. And the reality is that's not true. Software engineering is just like any other creative endeavor. There are certain kind of baseline techniques and tools that you need to become familiar with, but those are anybody can learn that. Deciding what it is that you want to write and learning how to solve problems and to find and fix bugs, that's the much more difficult thing, and you can become very good at that by being very good at lots of different problem solving skills. And if you compose music, for example, or write poetry, or write of any kind, is the expression of ideas is expression of ideas. You can express ideas in a programming language in the same way you can do it with a spoken human language. I think what made me good over time is I put in the time. I mean, the 10,000 hours really is true. You can't really become expert at anything without putting in enough time. But you then have to find something that gives you the inspiration to want to do it. And for me, I had a product that I was working on, which was a digital asset management software. And I was working with a programming language called WebScript. It was a technology by the Next company, Next Computers, Steve Jobs' project after he was booted out of Apple. And WebScript was an interpreted version of Objective-C, which is the programming language of NextStep, the operating system on the Next computer. And what was nice about it is a scripting language means that you can edit something, in this particular case, reload the web page and see if what you were working on worked or not. So it was a very, very fast cycle. And so even though I was pathetically bad at it for quite some time, at least I could kind of improve at a pretty good clip. And it was still at the time when it was before the commercial World Wide Web. The web didn't exist. It was before the commercial internet. So there were kind of mailing list you could participate in, and you could ask a question, and then kind of 6, 7, 8 hours you might get an answer. So it was a kind of a slow response. But the important thing is that there are communities around every programming language, every environment, and if you get involved with them, now there are meetups. There's so much information available. People can become fluent very, very quickly. But still, the techniques are all the same. Is that you're not going to become awesome at it by yourself. You have to put in the hours, but you need to be able to be influenced and to have contact with other people. And you need to be working on something that you actually find interesting, right? So whatever that is, for me it was much more towards the user interface and manipulating, digital media. And mostly I taught myself to program because I got tired of trying to explain to kind of a prototypical nerd software engineer what I wanted to do. And I found that, in fact, I was able to pick it up. It isn't a mystery that people will have you believe it is. And I think if I was starting today, I would still start with an interpreted language, and I would probably start with Swift Playgrounds on an iPad. because it is a very modern programming language. It's pretty easy to understand, and you can see the results right away. So it doesn't really matter what you're doing. You could, play around with manipulating geometric forms on screen and see the effects of basic math calculations. Or you can, do things like go fetch interesting data from the web, whatever it is, images, and get a bunch of images and manipulate them. Whatever it is that you find interesting, if you find something like that, you can then kind of experiment, get some basic familiarity, and then find a community of people who are doing similar things and get in contact with them. And I think you will find that most software engineers, if they're any good, they will be very happy to help you, because nobody got to be good without having received lots of help themselves. And I think that kind of true artists, true craftsmen in any field want to kind of pass it along and want to see the state of the art improve. So it generally makes me happy to see much better work coming out at much earlier age by younger and younger people, because it moves the industry forward. So I hope this is somewhat useful. Sorry for the long ramble, but I will leave you with a thing. If to me, it's an exceptionally satisfying career in ways that I never would have imagined. It pays extremely well. I don't know if my brother Richard told you, but I currently work at Netflix as an iOS engineer, and I've been there for 3 years. It's a spectacularly good company. Software engineering has really allowed me to do lots of very interesting things and to provide a very nice life for my family, with a level of flexibility and ability to travel, and that I don't know that I would get if I was a dentist. I don't know. But I've enjoyed it very much, and I wish you great success and luck as you move forward with your career.
Let me ask you a few
Sure.
questions. So, could you give a kind of potential scenario for Anthony if he decides that he wants to pursue this? So, how long for somebody who's got the underlying, brain power, has a little bit of a background already, and is highly motivated? How long do you think it would take to get to a point where you would be good enough to have value to somebody who might want to pay you to do programming in some way?
There are all these boot camps that are around there, and I've seen people come out of them and kind of send them off to a JavaScript, CSS web, a web programming environment, and they kind of promise after 6 months of intense work, you are actually employable. And so I think I wouldn't say that it's anything less than 6 months to a year, but even that's kind of making the assumption that you were, eating, breathing, and drinking that, and doing nothing else. So it does take a couple of years, and those couple of years can be compressed into 6 months or 12 months if you sacrifice everything else in your life. That may be appropriate, may be possible at certain phases in your life. It was a lot easier for me to do that type of thing. It was a lot easier for me to stay up until 2 and 3 in the morning before I had a wife and child. So I don't know what your situation is. If you feel the motivation, the inclination, have the ability to kind of spend that amount of time, it may be something that you can do in 6 months to a year. But I would count on more like 1 to 3 to become competitive, because I think the good news, bad news of the web and digital transformation of industry is that when you are working, you are truly competing against everyone on the planet. So there's a reason why lots of people kind of will outsource software engineering to other parts of the world where cost of living is so much less than in areas where people traditionally think about where software engineering is done. So Silicon Valley, Bay Area is hyper expensive. And if you want to be able to work here, you better be 10 times better than the average person, because you're going to be paid way more than everywhere else because it's so expensive. But the point of it is, for kind of you have to kind of think differently about the kind of basic utility of software engineering, and then what makes somebody who's competent, because there's kind of table stakes to be able to say, yes, I'm a software engineer with expertise in some domain, whether it's kind of mobile programming or desktop programming or web programming or back-end data analysis, whatever. Now, whatever is the specific field you want to go into, there's certain kind of table stakes that you have to have. Well, so then there are lots of people around the entire planet who will have those basic table stakes, and the question is what separates them in their success in their career. One kind of certainly has to do with contacts, whom and that type of thing. But I think the other thing too, and it's not really discussed much, is your creativity as a person. I've always found that the best software engineers I've ever worked with had high skills in other areas, whether it was music, cooking, dance, any other type of creative endeavor. It does exercise your mind and helps you approach problems from a different perspective and to be able to kind of look for solutions from a different perspective. So while you're spending the time, pursuing the basic table stakes skills in whatever programming language and development environment you're talking about, you should avoid the mistake of thinking, well, that's the only thing that matters, and I should suppress all other aspects of my life and never think about it and never talk about it, because people would say, I'm really into whatever, synchronized swimming or some other what may seem an arcane thing. I can guarantee you that whatever skills and passions you have in some aspect of your life, it forms who you are as a person and determines the way that you look at the world and look at problems. So, try to imagine how solving one problem in one domain or seeking inspiration in one thing that you do can actually apply to how you solve problems with software, because that will make you a better software engineer, and will also make you it makes you stand out in a way that otherwise you wouldn't, because everybody and their mother can check off, I have expertise in these programming languages, in this environment, these sets of APIs. That and 50 cents will get you a packet of sugar at Starbucks.
So would you mind sort of just giving a overview of your career,
Sure.
how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, so when I moved to San Francisco in 1989, I had been working at a language translation and training company in New York, and I was very adept at using the Macintosh desktop tools at the time. So I was very, very kind of skilled at using the tools, but I didn't know how to write them. And then my brother convinced me, saying, well, you should come out to San Francisco, because if you can teach somebody how to move a mouse, you can earn $1,000 a day as a consultant, which probably was true for some number of people for 4.5 hours. But I ended up working at a company that actually did do training in the tools that came out there, Quark Express and Photoshop and Illustrator, all these tools that were kind of upending the graphic design industry. And I was working with a company that was co-founded by this woman that she had a software product that was to be bundled with the Macintosh at the time, but then had gotten into trouble because some guy named Bill Gates told the folks at Apple, if you don't stop bundling software, with your computer, I'm not going to write for your fucking little platform. And so the deal was scuttled, and so she had to try and figure out how to take this piece of software that was started on the Mac, very, very far ahead of its time, and find some new home for it. So she actually then had it ported to the Atari, which was kind of absolutely on the decline in the United States, but was still going very strong in Europe, particularly in Germany. So I joined the company, and that's where I started kind of designing software. I couldn't code, I didn't make any sense to me, but I was so skilled and understood what desktop publishing and design software should do, that I could say, it should do this, it should do that, this is important, that's not important. So I worked with software engineers to try and hammer that out. And knowing that the Atari was kind of a dying platform, we all kind of had set our sights on this new next computer, which seemed so fascinating and so far ahead of its time, and it was. And so, we released it and it got the most we possibly could out of it, but then we made the transition to writing software for Next, which seemed like it was going to be the next big thing. And from a technology perspective, it was absolutely 10 to 15 years ahead of its time, but commercially it did not do very well. And there's whole long stories to be told about that. But fast forward to when I was 30, and that's when I kind of decided at that point that I actually wanted to learn to write code myself. So that's when I started using this technology called WebObjects, which was kind of the last great thing that Apple had made, rather Next had made, and then when Next was acquired by Apple, kind of the technology lived in, and everything that NextStep was kind of went into Mac OS and iOS. And so it was kind of all this obscure knowledge that I had and all this involvement in something that was seen as this strange, dreamy, undertaking became absolutely the mainstream. So a lot of that had to do with luck. And working with the web, since the first web browser and web server was created on the Next computer, I kind of had exposure to that long before a lot of people did. So that was lucky. But anyway, I spent kind of years and years perfecting my skills before I started writing my own software. So I worked on server-side stuff using WebObjects and built a company with it, and it did well. It was called Webware, and then that lasted 8 years. And so we were venture funded. We served very demanding customers very deeply. We had customers like Martha Stewart and Sony Pictures and Bristol Myers Squibb and all sorts of interesting enterprise and academic and entertainment customers for this digital asset management software that essentially was solving a problem that I had discovered and kind of experienced in my 20s. And then after that, when mobile phones and the iPhone came out, that presented a whole new series of possibilities, and I worked on my own product. I spent 5 years working on this thing called Memory Miner, which was a work of passion, which I won't bore you with. But as I said, I started when I was 30. I'm 52 now. In some ways, that's kind of 10, 20 years ago, that would normally kind of be considered the death knell of a software engineer, but I don't think that's the case anymore. I am definitely the oldest person on my team, but I think I'm also, in many ways, the most respected and appreciated, precisely because of my experience and because I'm not a crufty old man. I don't say, wow, that's how we used to do it in the old ways. I'm absolutely open to how new technologies come along and realize that I think 5 to 7 years is kind of the number of years that it takes before you are kind of have the same basic technical chops as anyone else for a given programming language. In other words, you don't become 10 times better after having 10 years in working on in one particular technology. It just doesn't work that way. It really, after that, it comes down to experience. So to the extent that I've seen a lot of problems and seen a lot of recurring patterns, that's helpful, that you get over time. But in terms of saying that, I can, execute be given a design and say I can do it 10 times faster, 10 times better, I don't think that's the case. So it's there is this thing where there is a baseline amount of time that you need, but beyond that, somebody who's been doing it 10 years longer, they're not necessarily better because they've spent 10 years writing the code. They would become better because they kind of experienced different looked at different patterns or looked at the same kind of recurring problems or recurring opportunities.
So, how is it you ended up at Netflix?
I joined a company called Findery that was created by this woman named Katerina Fake. You might remember a social network called Flickr, which was kind of the granddaddy, the grandmama of social media. It was a very popular photo sharing site, and so she created this software called Findery, which was something near and dear to my heart. It was a location-based kind of storytelling application to help people understand what makes a place in the world, a town, a village, or whatever, interesting. And so you would use mobile phones to be able to capture and describe something interesting about a place beyond just here's a restaurant and I'm going to check in saying here I'm eating. Is something about kind of telling you about the graffiti on the wall or something about the history of a building or history of a place. So it was something that was kind of akin to building the New Yorker for the web. It was critically acclaimed but did not achieve mass financial success. It's still running. I'm proud of having worked on it. But when I joined, about a month or two after I joined, I received a recruiting email from Netflix and saying, "Hey, we really like your skills in video annotation." And I spent many years working on basically taking the technology I had created through Memory Miner, which is about annotating digital media and kind of linking it together by people and place and time. And I kind of transferred that, and as a consultant, as one person described it, I took my laptop and shook it out, and the source code and techniques and patterns that I had learned for writing this software that was my passion, I could actually resell. And that's the glorious thing about software. If you own the code, you can adapt it, and even if you work on it in one product that may not be commercially successful, if it's good, you can then apply it to another problem. So I did just that, and I acquired that level of expertise. And so I was approached by them, and I said, well, I just joined this company, and I'm really interested in doing it. I appreciate the interest, but no thanks right now. So then about 3 years after that, they said, we're starting up a new team. We're rewriting the iOS app. You have tons of experience in writing native iOS apps. You have all this experience in video and digital storytelling. Please come and talk to us. So I did. And I had never worked for a large company before at all. The largest company I'd ever worked at had 80 people, and that was a company I co-founded. And at 80 people, it seemed that we were impossibly large, so I was very nervous. But I went and interviewed and did a take-home project, which was very good. And I passed phone screen, did 2 days of interviews, and was made an offer I absolutely couldn't refuse. They really did kind of back a dump truck of money up to my house. And given that I was living in San Francisco and my kid was in private school, I was happy to take it, but I was nervous that I would hate it. But in fact, I've been there for 3 years and I love it. And the team that I'm on, in many ways reminds me of the best aspects of companies I had co-founded. You know, there were 12 people at Findery and there were 12 people on my iOS team, and they feel very much the same. In terms of how we interact and kind of the fluidity and the kind of care and concern and enjoyment we have with working with each other. The difference is that, you know, we're 12 people housed in a company with several thousand people working on a product that is really well loved and respected around the world. And that has its own kind of nice things. I've never worked in a company where everybody who works there is the smartest person in the room, and so nobody's the smartest person in the room, if that makes any sense. Nobody is arrogant. They work very, very hard not to have, you know, anybody who is what they call a brilliant jerk. People are super, super smart and the top in what they do. They don't have any arrogance. Everybody's very happy and willing to help other people and know that they can learn something. So I can learn something from a data scientist, even though I'm a mobile UI engineer. And people are very kind of freewheeling and free with their knowledge.
So how is it that the Netflix recruiters, those 2 times, how is it they knew about you?
From LinkedIn.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not, because I know you've done lots of speaking and.
I've done that as well, and that actually helps. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I've spoken at lots of conferences. I'll probably send a link from some talks I've given that may be helpful and useful to you. That helps. You know, community does definitely help. You know, I owe many opportunities I've received in my life to people that I've met and say, oh, I know you have skills in this area. Let me put you in touch with that person. So that I mean, this is just kind of generic advice, but it absolutely holds true. Kind of your ability to make relationships with people that are based on kind of, you know, mutual respect and mutual help really will get you a long way in the world.
All right, a couple more things.
Sure.
I do appreciate this very much, and I'm sure Anthony will. You said that, tell me if I've basically got this correct. It definitely takes time to get to a point where you are at the base level of competence, whatever that amount of time is, 6 months, 3 years, or whatever. You get to that point, and you're not going to be making the Bay Area kind of money.
No.
But would you say that if you are at that level of competence, not an asshole, you know, a well-rounded person or whatever, you can make 6 figures?
Yeah.
So that kind of money is not. You don't have to be in a third world country to have a job, right?
No.
Yeah.
No, I think that, you know,
Yeah.
when I started my first job out of school, you know, when I was 21, I was, you know, somewhat thrilled to have had a job because it was a down economy at the time, and I was earning $25K a year. I was also off the books, so kind of, in some ways, it was equivalent to more. But I was working very hard, and I was working at it to build another person's company, and I didn't have any ownership, and that's kind of why I left New York. Yeah. But the point of it is that, you know, I'm kind of astounded at what the starting salary is. It's like in any given field, there really is a demand, which is one of the reasons why the software tools have become easier to use, because for 2 reasons. Is that, you know, they want more people to be able to enter the industry in some ways because
drives prices.
It drives the price down a little bit. But on the other hand, it's not just that. It's just that, you know, software engineering seemed to be this kind of rarefied thing. But, you know, the famous phrase "software eating the world" is true. There's no domain in the world that has not already started being transformed. There are whole new industries and new possibilities that have yet to be invented with it. So I think software engineering is becoming kind of a baseline skill. You'd be expected to be able to write cohesively, hopefully, and to be able to think and to have general intelligence for many definitions of that word. But I think, you do, any competent software engineer should be able to get to six figures with a couple of years of experience.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, John.
Sure. I see a little bit of it.